The ultimate pro basketball preview, presented by Audacy and Locked On Podcast Network. Revenge Tour.
Welcome to another episode of the Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview 2022, presented by Audacy and the Locked On Podcast Network. This 6-episode series will answer all of your lingering questions about the upcoming NBA season, and each episode will feature the Locked On NBA Roundtable with Locked On local experts covering their teams every single day on their own shows, a Nothing But Bets segment where we hear from the host of the Locked On Bets podcast, Lee Sterling, and your boy Q about the betting angle. We'll also hear from NBA experts like Trysta Krick of the Heat Check podcast from Audacy. Our fantasy expert Josh Lloyd of Locked On Fantasy Basketball will be weighing in with all the biggest stories around fantasy basketball, and the voice of the NBA draft, Locked On NBA Big Board host Rafael Barlow will join us towards the end to talk about the players that some of these teams will be tanking for. I'm your host, Nick Engstead, daily host of the Locked On Mavericks and NBA podcast, but for this series, I'll be your host as we visit with over 30 different experts to get you ready for the NBA season. Today, we're visiting with teams on the Revenge Tour. The Phoenix Suns, Denver Nuggets, Miami Heat, Philadelphia 76ers, and Dallas Mavericks are all looking to rebound from last year's disappointment. Which of these teams could be a title contender, and what has to go right for all of them to make it? We break it all down on today's episode, and to kick us all off, here's Trysta Krick of Audacy's Heat Check podcast with who she thinks is a legitimate title contender from today's group.
Well, I think there's a couple, right? I think number one, you can't count Miami out. It's always very ugly watching Miami in the postseason, even during the regular season, right? But they've been in the mix now multiple years in a row where they've got that pedigree. They always add these guys that you've never heard of before. Somehow these undrafted players turn into key rotation guys that end up either able to get money on the Heat or able to get money somewhere else. They lost PJ Tucker and you think to yourself, well, they didn't really add anyone else. And then you look and see, dig a little deeper. Darius Days, baby, out of LSU. He could be very interesting. One of Jerry West's favorite young players. He goes undrafted. If Kyle Lowry ends up being himself, which he wasn't really all last year, if he is, I think that's a matchup problem. Are they good enough to beat a healthy Bucks team? No, of course not. Almost no one is. But look what happened last year. Sometimes your imaginary matchup never ends up happening, right? And then in the West, I think Denver is one of those teams that's being slept on, right? It's really easy to forget how close Denver ended up playing Golden State. Jokic was carrying the load. 3 out of the 5 games were very tight. Even game 2, halftime, very tight, right? Jokic was making it a sweat. And then you add back in Jamal Murray, who's a bubble god. Like, he went down to an ACL injury. I think he's going to be really good. Obviously, Michael Porter Jr. coming back from injury, probably even more important. Very versatile two-way wing. He can shoot the leather off the ball if they get him in the mix, and he's healthy. That really helps. You add Christian Braun and Peyton Watson. Super, super intriguing with Bruce Brown, with KCP. I think this team's really interesting. I think they're going to be a matchup problem. And on top of that, you've got Jokic, who's, one of the best, if not the best centers in the world.
Welcome into the Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview 2022. This is the Locked On NBA Roundtable. All of us here host shows covering our teams 5 days a week on YouTube and on the podcast. I am Nick Engstead from the Locked On Mavericks podcast. I've been your moderator, but now my team is represented in this as well. We're calling this the Revenge Tour. All of these teams have something that they're coming back from last year. A disappointing playoff series, potentially, for some of these. An MVP campaign to revenge. A player that did not win MVP that really thought he should have won MVP that's coming back for a revenge tour. And all of the above. So let's introduce our hosts here. Like I said, I'm Nick Engstead from Locked On Mavericks. And joining us from Denver, we have...
I'm Matt Moore. I'm the co-host of Locked On Nuggets and senior writer for the Action Network.
Joining us all the way from Philadelphia, we have...
I'm Devon Gibbons from Locked On 76ers, co-host on that podcast, and also 97.5 The Fanatic in Philadelphia.
All the way down in South Beach from Miami, we have
Wes Goldberg, co-host of Locked On Heat.
And speaking of Heat in Phoenix, we have
Brendan Clean, Locked On Suns.
Gentlemen, let's start with this. Which team has the best case to be a title contender? I'll open this up to the team that came to mind first for me is I'm feeling pretty good about the 76ers this year. James Harden said he's motivated now. He's in shape, apparently. And the last time we saw motivated, in shape James Harden, he can take a team pretty far. Devon, do you think the Sixers have the best case to win a title, or is it somebody else in this call?
No, I do think it's the 76ers. They have been on this path for the last couple of seasons. And unfortunately for them, they've been knocked out in the second round, which has been a big problem here in Philadelphia. But now with James Harden, starting the year off from day one, training camp, the entire offseason where the team got together quite a bit together in Los Angeles and Philadelphia and different parts of the country, working together. And also the unselfishness of him, James Harden, if you will, giving up the money that he did, at least for this season. We know he'll be compensated later on if things work out properly, but to add to this team to fix the issues that they have with their depth issues, the toughness that has been a big issue with this basketball team for the last couple of seasons. I do think the Philadelphia 76ers are certainly in that conversation for the contender in the Eastern Conference, and it's certainly in the entire basketball association. So yeah, I think it is the 76ers as far as this group goes.
For anybody else, what's going to hold the Sixers back from winning a title this year? Maybe it's another team or Matt Moore. What could potentially hold the Sixers team back?
Let's see. Joel Embiid very rarely makes it through one full season, let alone his long streak of actually being pretty healthy. Very likely he's going to miss some time. Look, I'm just saying there's a lot of strip clubs in the world and James Harden exists. Like, that combination is not going to be great for their title contention. The depth is good, but it's getting older. Murray went older with this group. And so I think that there's going to be some risk there. If PJ Tucker takes a step back at all, that's a little worrisome. They made some gambles here. Shooting, I think, is another little bit of a concern. I think the Sixers are going to be awesome, but I wouldn't put them at the top of this group as far as a title contender.
Who would you put?
Oh, it's Denver Nuggets. It's absolutely Denver Nuggets. Look, I just think if you look at the actual comparison here, two of the other teams on this list had pretty brutal playoff runs. One of them is just a flaming mess of disaster as far as chemistry goes. The Nuggets are in a really good spot. Jamal Murray came back in preseason. He's looked good. MPJ's back. He looks good. Nikola Jokic is the two-time MVP. As long as he's on the floor, they're going to be pretty great. They added Kentavious Caldwell-Pope for defense and Bruce Brown for defense. Bones Highlands looked great in preseason. The bench is going to be better when it was the worst unit in the league. The starters may have one of the best offensive ratings that we've seen in the last 10 years. They're going to absolutely cook. The division's weaker. They're going to have a lot of opportunities there. Denver is well primed, I think, for a playoff run. This is a team that made the Western Conference Finals. This is a team that gets back a whole lot of firepower. I think the Nuggets should be at the top of the list.
I think this we have to do debate style, where if your team gets called out, you have to respond. So Brendan Clayton, the Locked On Suns, can you make a case for the Nuggets to, what's going to hold them back, and then talk about the Suns and maybe the chemistry situation?
The chemistry situation is like this chapter of the Suns, the book on this era of the Phoenix Suns. I don't know where that will go. I mean, that's kind of difficult to know. It sounds like the ownership situation is changing. Deandre Ayton's been back to his normal self. I was in his media availability post-game after the first preseason match. He was in his normal, cheery, bright-eyed self. So it seems like we're getting back to normal there. I mean, the Nuggets, I think, exhibit A of what might go wrong is what happened with the Suns in 2021. They got swept, and I think the defensive limitations of Jokic, I'm not somebody who feels like that's inhibiting for them to ever win a championship, but I think it's at least a question that needs to be answered. Obviously, their health. Guys are coming back. Will they stay healthy? Will they be their normal selves? But I mean, that roster is really, really good. I feel like that Denver roster is maybe the best we've seen of the Jokic era. So you're not going to hear me saying that the Nuggets are going to be terrible. As for defending the Suns, I came on this preview last year and I was incredibly cocky, and that was shoved back in my face by the team that you cover, Nick. So you know all about that. And so I'm not going to sit here and say that the Suns are the favorites of this group. I think they'll be a great team again, but there are questions. There's no doubt.
Question. Can they beat the 36ers if they face them in a rematch? The Adelaide 36ers. Is that, if they do have to face it, they have to go through the NBL and the playoffs. Do they think that they can get through?
Yeah, I'd say if the starters play more than 22 minutes, it probably goes pretty well for them. And it's, not a preseason game. They're going to make a Jay Crowder trade. Like, very, very much of an overreaction. I've never seen preseason matter so much outside of Monday night. But, it's the Suns. They're going to have to face that. It's been a bad stretch for them. They deserve all of it.
And the Suns bring it upon themselves, right? Like when Devin Booker responds by posting on Instagram with the LeBron meme from the 2011 finals when he was losing to the Mavericks, these guys wake up every day and go to their boring jobs and go to this blah blah blah. They hate their life and they just want to bring down everybody else.
What I took from that, Nick, is I think Booker's going to win 3 of the next 6 finals. Right? That's what happened with LeBron. So it seems like that's where we're headed with the Suns.
For sure. Yeah.
Wes Goldberg, what's the case? Nobody's mentioned the Heat as having the best case, but what's the best case for the Heat to win a title this year?
No, just insert like Grand Theft Auto gif. Oh, here we go again. right here. Throw that in right here, because what are we, 10 minutes into this thing? We have yet to mention the Miami Heat. Classic media people overlooking the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference last year. Nobody wants to talk about the Heat ever since LeBron left South Beach. Look, I get it. I'm used to it. Whatever. It is what it is. I'll just do it this way. We'll just go roast style. Denver, can Jamal Murray prove that he's healthy beyond just making a corner 3 in the preseason?
I don't roasted.
Roasted. Dallas, you got to get through the Western Conference. There's so many better teams than you. You have Luka Doncic and what else? Like Christian Wood coming off the bench. Congratulations. Big offseason move. You burned.
So
Boom, roasted.
Get over your drama, man. That's crazy. Like Devin Booker. Posting somebody else's comments. Why don't you just say something, Devin Booker? Burnt. Philadelphia. James Harden, really? We're going to rely on him? I was just going through right before we got here. He's talking about how motivated to be in condition. You can go back to like 2018. It's the same quotes every single summer for James Harden. I got on a treadmill this summer. Cool, man. Great for you. Burnt. Miami, meanwhile. Eric Spoelstra, best coach in the league, voted by his peers for the second year in a row. Nothing that you look at the other coaches on this list, they're not even in the same universe as Eric Spoelstra as a coach. Best defense or an elite defense last year. You lose PJ Tucker, but still going to be top 10 defensively. Offensively, I think there's still a lot to like. Tyler Hero is going to make another leap. Bam Adebayo is doing all the right things. And I just think that you're looking up and down this group. Would I pick the Heat to win the championship? No, but we're talking about revenge tour teams. We don't have the other favorites right now on this call. So of this group, I love Miami's chances. They're stable, and they're not dealing with all this other mess that these other teams are dealing with on the side. And the spotlight is going to be on all of you guys, and it's not going to be on the Miami Heat.
Let me jump in on that burnt real fast as you talk about that. As we talk about burnt, how hot it is in Miami with the Heat. This coming from a summer where a big announcement was made by Udonis Haslem for his 20th consecutive season when he doesn't even play. And with all due respect, we all love Udonis Haslem from afar. But yeah, all right, come on. That's the big story of the offseason and the long hair of Jimmy Butler now as he does the things that he's doing.
Your argument against the Heat is the 14th guy on the roster?
Yeah, I had to throw that one in there. That's fun.
And possibly the only power forward they have.
Correct. Thank you, Matt.
On the Dallas Mavericks, I don't think they have the best case, but they do have either the best player or the second best player on this call. And in the NBA, I think, with Luka Doncic. And anytime you have that player and you've put at least a deep enough roster around him, we've seen in the past, a player make a run with a pretty deep team around him and go to the finals in 2011 and end up.
I remember that.
Beating a team. Do you remember 2011?
I don't remember anything about that year. It's
beating
weird.
A team that they were not supposed to beat. So it's Luka Doncic. It's the depth around him. The Mavericks finally have an identity that they're really diving into. They haven't had that. They didn't have that in the Rick Carlisle era. They now have it in the Jason Kidd era, him being the head coach now. And they at least have that. They know what they're doing going forward. And I think there's a trade for the Mavericks to make at a certain point. If any of these players, steps up and increases their value, if Christian Wood goes on a little bit of a run, if Tim Hardaway Jr. recoups some of his trade value, and then the Mavericks have their picks going forward. They owe a 2023 pick to the New York Knicks in the Porzingis trade, but then they have all their picks going forward, and we all saw this offseason what just a couple of picks can do in a trade, because it seems like everybody just wants 3 or 4 picks for a star player. So if the Mavericks, for them to have the best case, would have to make a move like that and fix the second best player problem, which has been the problem for the Mavericks since they drafted Luka Doncic.
I think they're going to probably have the best, not best. They're going to have a great regular season. I don't know if they'll win as many games. I think they're going to have a great regular season. I think Luka's in really good position to win MVP because they're just going to give him the ball all the time. This is going to be an absurd Russell Westbrook, James Harden-esque season from Luka Doncic. He's going to put up absurd numbers. They've got good shooting around him. The questions around the league are about, can Jason Kidd in year 2 hold it together? Because there's been a lot of questions about Jason Kidd year 2, his relationship with some of the players. And then I think in the playoffs, that's my big thing. Is like, we're 8 months from the playoffs. Regular season, I think they're going to be fine. But that style of James Harden does everything and then goes partying, which Luka is just brilliantly on track to emulate, is, I think, a little bit of a concern when playoffs come.
And then the other part for me is the Christian Wood aspect of this all. Just seeing him from his days from UNLV to the Delaware 87ers, where he went through the G League with the 76ers organization. The problem with him, Nick, is he thinks he's better than he really is. He's a good player. He's very talented, but he really believes that he is that guy. And when Jason Kidd comes out and says, yeah, he's probably going to be the sixth man coming off the bench. That's probably his best position in this league, to come in and be able to do that and be a sixth man of the year candidate because of how talented he is. And he really believes that he is on that level of an all-star caliber player. So if he's not buying in and not really accepting what the coaching staff is preaching, playing with the great players Matt talked about and Luka Doncic and what he's going to be able to do, he's going to feed him and get him opportunities. He really needs to accept what his role is and not think that he is an all-star level player when he's not.
Yeah, I think he may determine the ceiling of the Mavericks. Like, the floor is already set with Luka, with Dinwiddie, with the two wings. Their self-proclaimed nickname, the Bang Bros, that they've called themselves, and Reggie Bullock and Dorian Finney-Smith. But I think Christian Wood, what he can be and what he could bring to this team, could raise the ceiling for the Mavericks. And him accepting his role coming off the bench is going to be the big one. What about the talking about a revenge tour? Having a revenge tour. Joel Embiid had a lot of comments about how he should have been the MVP last year. Devon, are you buying that? Do you think, you've already said that we've already talked about how Luka has a really good case to win MVP. According to BetOnline, he's the favorite going into this year. Is that something that Joel Embiid is trying to go for this year? Is his legit revenge tour to try to get MVP?
No, it doesn't appear to be. At least that's what he's saying right now. It starts off the conversation in training camp and media day and all. Seems like they're stepping away from that a little bit. What more can he do is how he just basically phrases it. And look, I've had my issues with Joel Embiid over the years. And one of the things that I did back him on these last two seasons when talked about it, of course, the play speaks for itself. And when he didn't win it 2 years ago, he didn't play enough games, and that was obvious. And that's how it goes. Last season, I thought was his real best case. The issue I always had from seeing how the questions would come from different people, from nationally and both locally, is that they would ask him about it. And he answered it. And oftentimes we get upset when people don't answer questions. And he answered it. And he said that he wanted it and felt like, okay, he wanted it. And he always says championships, while I always see people leave that part out when he mentions winning the championship. Now, you can talk about the level of play, but in terms of answering the question, that's one thing. But I do think that he is a focus. He talked about the defensive team being number one overall in the league. We'll see if that comes to fruition. But I do think that he kind of backed off of the MVP for this season, recognizing that, hey, it goes the way that it goes with the voting.
Luka was asked about MVP just as much, and Luka only has about a 25-word word bank that he usually gives us in any kind of question that has ever been asked him. But he was asked about MVP a lot, and it was not as much of a conversation on him. I think there are ways to answer it. Joel leaned into it and was maybe more truthful than some of these other guys, than Luka or Jokic when they were asked about it last year.
He definitely answered. He answers questions. He's long-winded with his answers, and he's thoughtful with his. He says a lot, and
loves that media. Loves that media, Joel Embiid. By the way,
what's that like?
He was asked about it. When SI just happened to come and show up a month and a half before the award was voted on and do a long profile about how he's the MVP. It's weird.
He does it locally too. He does it locally too, man. I don't know if you're tuning in all the time here locally in Philadelphia, but he definitely is asked about it quite a bit here in town, and he answers the question.
My thing is,
I don't have to stand up for him. He can stand up for himself. I'm just telling you from being here and just hearing it and how it's framed, and then also checking in on the national piece also where it's talked about. And I'm like, I don't know if you're here to kind of understand everything. Like, I don't know what's going on in Minnesota all the time. That's why I read everybody there in Minnesota to try to pick up on it. But I can't give that same type of answer knowing that I'm not there.
I think Joel wants it. I think it's pretty obvious. Joel
Absolutely. I didn't say he didn't want it.
And that's okay.
I didn't say he didn't want it.
And that's okay. Like, honestly, I think Jokic's whole thing of like, I don't really care. It's not better. Like, that's not better. It's not like more impressive that a guy doesn't want it, right? Like, you shouldn't constantly be focused on these type of things. It's not going to get you anywhere.
They should just be. I think they shouldn't be penalized for being honest. I really don't think Jokic cares. I think in the summers he wants to go ride horses and that's it. He gets paid a bunch of money. I think Joel Embiid really does care, and I don't know why people blast these athletes sometimes for being honest. It's a little bit like what's going on locally in Miami. People are blasting Tyler Hero for saying he wants to be a starter. It would be weird if he didn't want to be a starter in the NBA. And just because he says it to the media, this is why these guys aren't always honest, is because they get to be honest, and then they get blasted for it.
But you can't also be like, oh, it's totally okay, whatever they say, as long as they're honest. That's like you should be on. You can choose to be honest.
Sure. No, I mean, look, there's certain things that people will say that are completely out of bounds if you're being honest. Like, but if we're just talking about, hey, I want to win MVP, I want an award, and I want this trophy. Say whatever you want, man. Who cares?
It's a lot of the Jon Snow and Daenerys Game of Thrones, right? Like Jon Snow, the whole like last season, like I don't want it. Like I don't want it. He just didn't want the Iron Throne, and Daenerys.
Your Jon Snow impression?
Daenerys is like, I want the Iron Throne as much as possible, and we look at them differently because of it. Now, there's maybe a gender thing with that too, but coming up, let's get into these teams. What's their path to the finals? What has to go right for their team to make the finals, to break out and to finally make an NBA finals? We'll talk about that with this group coming up. In our first 5 episodes, we'll hear from fantasy basketball expert Josh Lloyd for his fantasy basketball outlook. You can catch him Monday through Friday and more on Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Here's Josh Lloyd's Fantasy Minute.
The Phoenix Suns, the big riser here, I think, is going to be Cameron Johnson, who moves from a bench role into a starting role. We still don't know, at the time of me recording this, what's happening with Jay Crowder and what players are coming back in a deal, which could have an impact on Johnson. But Johnson is a guy that can score pretty well, rebound okay, really efficient, and is going to hit threes, of course. For Denver, it's the return of Jamal Murray. I'm not worried about him at all. In terms of concern about how few minutes he's going to play coming back from the injury, he's fine to go. I'm way more worried about Michael Porter Jr. because of the third back surgery, but there's value in both of those guys at the right draft spot. Bones Highland is an interesting later round. For Miami, there's a big opening at power forward. Is it going to be Omer Yurtseven that starts, Caleb Martin, Haywood Highsmith? Do they go really small and put Victor Oladipo in there and push Jimmy Butler up to the 4? I think taking a flyer on a Yurtseven or a Caleb Martin with your last pick makes a little bit of sense. And in Philadelphia, Tyrese Maxey's preseason has been unbelievable. He won't shoot 80% during the year, I guarantee you that. And I think some of these preseason performances might push him up draft boards too far. I am pretty interested in James Harden at where he's getting drafted, but I'm absolutely no interest in Tobias Harris. And for Dallas, Spencer Dinwiddie's going to have to absorb a larger role. And I'm a little bit worried about Christian Wood if there is that ceiling on him coming off the bench behind JaVale McGee. And that might just mean that he gets drafted a little bit too early, whereas guys like Finney Smith and Reggie Bullock are really quite low upside players that I'm probably not going to be too interested in.
The Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview 2022 presented by Audacy and the Locked On Podcast Network. Before we get to our next roundtable conversation with our local experts, here's Trysta Krick of Audacy's Heat Check podcast with her thoughts on what has to go right for teams hoping to make a surprise run at the NBA Finals.
Oh boy, I tell you what. First and foremost, let's talk about the Suns. The Suns are one of those teams that could really be derailed by locker room issues, right? Like, they got to get rid of that drama. They have to shake that off. Ayton either needs to be moved in January to a place that he wants to go, or there needs to be a peace treaty with the teammates. CP3 grinds his guys down to dust. Like, I think that's annoying to his teammates. That needs to be fixed. Ayton has to be a very consistent force, I think. Cam Johnson needs to be better on defense now that he's a starter and has alienated Jay Crowder to the point where he's not even showing up, right? You need to be that guy that ends up pushing Jay Crowder out. You need to deserve that. CP3, of course, it's an issue. He's never healthy when it comes down to it, right? I know that there was COVID concerns, but on top of that, CP3 hasn't been healthy multiple playoffs. And Booker needs to be an MVP. He just needs to have that type of a season. And Monty Williams, I can't forget about him. He needs to be better at making in-game adjustments in order for them to go back to the finals again. In terms of Philly's a very intriguing team. James and Embiid, though, I think the number one thing for them is that they have to become one person. Like, the number one thing that Doc Rivers has said is that, James, you need to figure out when to be aggressive, when to end up feeding Embiid, and when to facilitate to your other teammates and get them involved, right? And if James can be some meshing between Houston James and Brooklyn James, and that balance is really right, I think that they could be very dangerous, and they need to figure out a way to become a better rebounding team. They were one of the worst in the NBA at that, and that's why they got PJ Tucker. I think that should help. And then Dallas, let's be honest, they're not contending this year. They need to acquire someone. That's just what it is. Like, you can't just lose Jalen Brunson and not pick anybody up. Sorry, Christian Wood, you're a nice piece, but I don't think that's going to be enough. And do you trust Spencer Dinwiddie to put up 41 if Luka's on the bench with an ankle injury? Hell no. Can I say hell no? Hell no. I do not trust Spencer Dinwiddie to be the guy. I've seen him in Washington, right here in the DMV. I've seen him in Brooklyn. Like, it's just not for me. And then, JaVale McGee, Christian Wood, nice piece. They're going to need to be the best versions of themselves, right? Get easy buckets. Prediction, to me, they fall very far in the standings. Potentially a play-in team. Really disappointing. And, I think they do need to add another piece in order to really contend.
Welcome back to the Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview 2022. This is the Locked On NBA Roundtable. We have all the teams represented here. All of our teams we have shows covering them 5 days a week on our YouTube channels as well as our podcast. You can go subscribe and follow those right now. What has to go right for each of these teams to make the NBA Finals? One of the favorites to go to the finals last year was the Phoenix Suns. Brendan, we'll start with you. What has to go right this year for the Suns to get back there?
Well, it was funny. You said coming into the break to finally make an NBA Finals. We saw that already about, 15 months ago. The Suns were there. They had a 2-0 lead. I don't know what happened after that. And then the next season started. I think there was just a gap I wasn't conscious for. But I think what has to happen for the Suns is they have to answer some of the postseason demons that have flared up, right? I mean, not only have they, depth has hurt them. They've had a little bit of a struggle adapting and changing how they play. But I think the bottom line is they've come up against Giannis Antetokounmpo and Luka Doncic, who are two of the maybe 3 or 5 best players in the entire NBA. And the Suns just haven't really been able to match that. It's one thing to say, oh, we'll guard those guys better. But it's another when you look at yourself and you say, hey, we don't have that other player to match them. And I think, unfortunately, because Chris Paul has not been his self at the end of those runs, because of the depth problems, because of their supporting cast is so young, they've just had these problems. So can Devin Booker rise to that occasion, continue to get better? Can you put Chris Paul in position to be what he needs to be by, the end of a season here in his late 30s? And can some of those, at least one of those young role players step up, whether that is DeAndre Ayton with his extension now coming back, Mikal Bridges, who's gradually gotten better? Can these guys become a bona fide third option in the way that a lot of these other teams have to make up for, hey, we don't have a Giannis, we don't have a Luka, but we have these other answers, and they just haven't, and they need to if they're going to win the title.
Matt Moore, how long should we expect Chris Paul to continue this run that he's made, like this late in his career renaissance almost?
Honestly, he's put in so much work with the diet and everything else. Like Chris he had his meniscus surgery a solid 14 years ago. And look, he has these random injuries like the hamstring that got him in 2018 and things like that. I think you have to be worried about it. I think you have to be concerned that he's gonna be there. But is that any more of a concern than Jamal Murray coming off of an ACL, or Jimmy Butler with 7,000 miles on him above age 32, or Joel Embiid? Period. Like all these teams I think have major injury concerns. The Mavericks maybe being the healthiest one. Chris, I think, has put so much work into extending his longevity, and I'd love to see him get a title. I honestly think it's as random as it is for any player with a little bit of heightened numbers for his age, but I don't think that Chris Paul is necessarily at a higher risk of injury than most of the major stars.
I think the problem with Chris has been that the level of difficulty to do what he does at his size makes it that an injury hampers him just so much more. A little hamstring tweak. We saw Jimmy power through some of that. He was clearly going through it. He's missing halves of games or entire games. And then the next time you would never know he was even hurt, because he can do things to adapt to that because he's 6'7" and he can do more on the floor. Whereas Chris needs to get to that mid-range jumper. He needs to be able to play with pace. He needs to be not turning the ball over and able to, get past the guy that's guarding him and all these different things. I think that's the problem. And then the other part of that is so much runs through him. There's not that backup plan when, okay, Chris is 70%, let's go to our other stuff. That hasn't existed. And I think that's on him too. And that's always been part of the Chris Paul problem, is so much is built off of him that when he's not there or he's less than, you're really running into problems.
Matt, you mentioned Jamal Murray. He's coming back from an ACL. He's incredibly important for this Nuggets team to make the finals. But what is it, him, or what has to go right for this Nuggets team to go back to the finals?
It's the defense. That's the question mark, right? So they invested a lot of money on the defensive side of the ball this offseason. They traded Will Barton, who was a big part of what the team had built. as well as Monte Morris, who they called Mr. Nugget in these parts. They trade both those guys so they get Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Pope's a much, much, much better defender than Barton. He's actually a better catch and shoot guy. Less work with the ball when in his hands, but he fits pretty perfectly with the team. Bruce Brown, another guy they added for defensive upside. They're hoping Zeke Naji can make a leap there. But a lot of this is just going to come down to their effort level and intensity and whether or not they can build those things. Aaron Gordon has shown that he can defend at a high level. KCP can. They've honestly shown that they can defend at a pretty high level with Jokic in certain schemes, but when he plays drop, he's toast. And so drop coverage and pick and roll with him retreating. That's why Chris Paul tore him up 2 years ago. Also, Jamal Murray was out. So you got all these kind of combinations of factors that are leading into question marks about the defense. Like, this is the big thing for them. Their offense is going to be absolutely molten metal. It's going to be incredible. But if their defense is still susceptible and they're having to go into set defenses on the half court every single time, they're not going to be able to win a title. Defense is going to decide whether or not this team is a real contender.
Devon, is it a similar kind of story for the Sixers?
Really is, because when you look at the starting lineup there for the Sixers, and I mentioned Joel Embiid talking about how they need to be the number one defensive team in the league, it starts with him on the back end, and he cleans up a lot of mess. But on the perimeter there, you have your problems, which is why they invested so much to bring in P.J. Tucker, even, yes, at the age of 37, but bringing in P.J. Tucker because of what we know him to be as a defensive player, adding DeAnthony Melton on the draft day trade from Memphis for Danny Green, also adding Daniel House, Matisse Thybulle coming off the bench if he is here for the remainder of the season. They know that defense is going to gear things up. They can score points with the best of them. We've seen it. Joel Embiid leading the league in scoring, James Harden being who he is, the accession of Tyrese Maxey as a scorer in this league, that they want to make sure that they get the ball in his hands, using speed as an advantage to get to the basket. Defense is going to really carry this basketball team, and that was preached at the end of the year a season ago. And it was certainly preached on media day, during training camp, and it will be as the start of the things go here, because they have a lot of offensive punch. They can do a lot of things there. They run some really good offensive sets. We'll see what James Harden is as an offensive player running this team. But Joel Embiid, Matisse Thybulle, DeAnthony Melton, P.J. Tucker, all of those players, the versatility that they have is what is going to be important defensively and how they run things through the Eastern Conference and maybe even getting to the NBA Finals.
Wes, are you buying this new James Harden? I'm doing air quotes for the audio listeners with this new James Harden.
You know what? I know I just was making fun of him, but yes, I am. I'm totally drinking the Kool-Aid here. I actually do think of this group, the Sixers have the best chance to win the championship, because at the end of the day, they're the only team that we're all representing here that can claim, maybe if James Harden is what he wants to be and is apparently motivated to be, have two top 10, top 12-ish type of players. I don't know that another team on this Zoom call can claim that. And so, I love their top end talent, and their ceiling, I think, is just so much higher than anybody else. When James Harden and Joel Embiid are on the court and they run pick and roll, they're basically unstoppable. And it'll be interesting to see how much Doc Rivers puts them on the court. Maybe that's more of a playoff thing, but that's when it's going to matter, and that's what is going to be the defining moment for this team. The Sixers are going to win a ton of regular season games. It's going to be hard for them not to, as long as they're healthy. It's just what happens in the playoffs. And can Doc Rivers kind of pull the right levers to get them to where they want to be, which is obviously the NBA Finals. He hasn't really done it over the last couple of years, but also Joel Embiid was hurt when in the series that they lost to the Heat for half of that series. I know I represent the Miami Heat here. I think if Embiid were healthy, I was at those games. I think the Sixers win that series. And so I think that they're a really, really good team, and I would probably put their ceiling higher than anybody else's.
And Wes, those games, Wes, when he broke his face in that final game with Pascal Siakam elbowing him in the face and already having a thumb issue, many people did predict the Sixers would win that series against the Miami Heat just because the matchup was better against the Heat versus some of the other teams that were out there, Milwaukee and Boston. And we know what happened. It was what it was. But Doc Rivers, I don't know if you guys saw that clip from the Real Training Camp Access that they had a couple of last week. And he talked about how this is not a democracy when it comes to the balls go to Embiid, and the other part is, James Harden, we need you to be aggressive and be yourself. So that's the focus. And you get Tyrese Maxey, having Tobias Harris comfortable, making sure that everybody else is in their spots. But again, it's not a democracy. It runs through Joel Embiid and James Harden. That's how the offense is going to go.
I just want to say one thing, though. I was okay when I said it, but when I heard Devon say that the Sixers would have won that, I didn't like it. I backtrack everything. I take it all back. The Heat would have won that series regardless.
The playoff combinations here, I think, are really how do you feel about, Monty Williams, Chris Paul, and Devin Booker? I mean, they made the finals, but obviously Chris has got some history. The Heat are certified, right? Denver's made playoff runs when they were fully healthy. And then there's Doc Rivers, James Harden, and Joel Embiid. That's a triple yikes, folks.
Hey, Matt, listen. Yeah, hey, I know we just met, but I'm one who I'm one when the whole Brett Brown thing went down and Doc Rivers' name came up. I was very vocal of no. And listen, I understand what his past was, and give him an opportunity. He's the best on the market. Go out there and do it. Okay, great. And look, all he did was come in and do exactly what Brett Brown has done, which is win 50-plus games, get to the second round, and lose. So it's also on him, and he knows that. And it's a big talking point here. And listen, I've been around the team now in this organization for 15 years, and seen from obviously Doug Collins to Brett Brown, and here with Eddie Jordan, and now with Doc Rivers. He's done nothing that hasn't already been done, and he has to get it done. And I was really the LA talk. It seemed like here from afar, just speaking to people, and I'm sure you all have, seemed like it was real. And we know he loves his golf. We know he, all those types of things. And we were very curious to see how that would all play out. But as far as that particular series went, that path versus playing Milwaukee or Boston in round number 2, yes, Wes, Matt, Brendan, Nick, I did believe that was their easier path to get to the Eastern Conference Finals. I don't know what would have happened when they got there, but it certainly seemed like that was it for last season. Yeah.
Can we talk about the Miami Heat? Are we gonna go another 15 minutes without talking about the Miami Heat?
Go ahead. What's the Miami Heat's best case, and what has to happen for them?
Well, unlike most of the teams that we're talking about here, the Heat don't really have that MVP candidate guy, right? There's no Nikola Jokic, Joel Embiid. There's not a Luka Doncic. Miami's best player is Jimmy Butler, who is never in these MVP conversations, mostly because he doesn't put himself there. Like regular season Jimmy Butler and playoff Jimmy Butler seem to be, over the last 3 years, 2 different Jimmy Butlers. One likes to score a lot, the one in the playoffs. The other one just kind of coast is a strong word, but it's sort of just getting through the regular season. But I'm done doubting Jimmy Butler in terms of whether or not he could be that wing who can carry a team to the NBA Finals. We've seen him get there once. We've seen him get within a shot of it last season, right? And to me, it's just everybody that's backing up Jimmy Butler. Like we talked about PJ Tucker going to Philadelphia. That was the biggest thing that happened for Miami too, because they never really replaced him and they didn't make any real additions. So it's just going to take everybody around Jimmy Butler that was on the roster last year that came short one game in the finals, stepping up their game. It's going to be Bam Adebayo having to step up and being more aggressive on offense. He averaged 13 shots last year. He's talking about maybe averaging 18 shots this year, potentially adding the three-pointer to his game. Tyler Hero, with that new contract extension that kicks in next season, can he start to become that kind of guy who's deserving of $30+ million a year, a top 40-ish player in the NBA? That's what he's got to be worth that kind of money. He needs to get on the path to being there, especially if he's a starter. And then it's going to be Kyle Lowry just getting healthy. He wasn't healthy last year for a variety of different reasons. He's more settled now in his second year in Miami. He looks great at media day and at the scrimmage last night and on Monday night. And so, yeah, if you can get all of those guys to step up their games around Jimmy Butler, and then Jimmy Butler carries you through the playoffs and you're getting those contributions from those guys, that would be the path for the Miami Heat.
You know, Wes, like Brendan talked about how like it's about Devin Booker kind of stepping up, and they've obviously got, we've talked about the chemistry issues there, and with the Nuggets and the Sixers, I think there's this question of like, okay, but can you really get there? Like, can you really get there? Can you put it all together around the talent? With the Heat, isn't it a lot of it about, do they have enough gas? Because They didn't make any real big additions. This team always finds guys that kind of contribute, like Yurtseven and dudes like that. But those are also not guys that you can feel great about in a playoff series. And that team looks so gassed at the end of the Eastern Conference Finals. Like, on top of the question of, is Jimmy Butler finally going to irritate them enough for a blow up, as he has literally everywhere else he's been? Is there kind of a concern about, is there any way for this team with its age and the lack of depth for them to be able to make it through the regular season and that deep to make the finals?
I think that is a concern. The weird thing about last year when the Heat were in the number 1 seed, I actually thought the COVID stuff that hit the league in December and a little bit of January actually helped Miami, because they have that culture of being like, hey, we can make Omer Yurtseven and Max Strus star players for a couple of nights and go ahead and win games this way, where all these other teams were fielding G League squads and couldn't win games. And that was sort of the period of the season where Miami got the number 1 seed. And I thought having home court advantage in the playoffs really helped them. I don't think that they're going to be the number 1 seed this year. I think with all things being equal, this is probably a team that's fighting for maybe a top 6 seed in the Eastern Conference. And I do think that you're going to be asking a lot from those guys. I think that's definitely a concern. The one thing is with the Heat, it feels like even though they just extended Tyler Hero and he was their main trade asset, who becomes basically untradeable for a year, I still think that this team is maybe ripe for a trade. They have a bunch of smaller salaries that they can move in like December, January, February, right before the trade deadline. And if they can kind of bunch a couple of those contracts together, attach a draft pick or two, and then go find a legit starting power forward or another scorer kind of guy, that could be the kind of thing that helps them kind of get over the top.
Nick, is there a plan that does not involve just like Luka Doncic being singularly the greatest player in the history of basketball for the Mavericks to make the finals?
Not in my book. I don't think. It comes down to what I said in the first segment. It's Spencer Dinwiddie and it's Christian Wood. There's a lot of X factor into both of those two players. If they can be, I don't know, like very fringe all-star level players, then you're looking at a Mavericks team that it has some depth, that has an identity, that has a bunch of guys on their team all of a sudden that can score 15 to 20 points in a game. And then that's a recipe that's enough stuff around a Luka Doncic that can beat a team like the Phoenix Suns that no one expected them to beat last year in a 7-game series. I mean, he can take you there and he can get that done. And so it is really all about Luka, and it's all about just the right recipe around him and honestly the right matchup sometime to beat, teams like that and make a finals run.
Spencer Dinwiddie rained threes on the Suns. Like, he's reason number 2 or number 3 that they won that game 7 by 30 the way they did. But if you're expecting an all-star caliber season, that worries me. He's been injury prone. He's been not living up to his potential. So I doubted him one time and he completely destroyed another team in front of my very eyes. But that feels like very high hopes. That's
what you have to do now that they lose Jalen Brunson. I mean, one of the big conversations around the Mavericks has been they need another shot creator. They finally had 3 shot creators, and it was like finally the offense that we wanted to see in the playoffs. And Jalen Brunson left. The Mavericks got nothing for him, and now all of a sudden Dinwiddie has to step up into a starting role. And who's after that? The question has been, who's the third ball handler on this team for all of training camp? And the answer Jason Kidd has given us is Frank Ntilikina. And that's not a good enough answer. Not a good enough answer for a team to potentially make a finals run. And so the answer is
that was the question when Jalen was there. Who's the third guy? And now that you lose Jalen, it's just elevated to a different level because of his exit. And Spencer Dinwiddie, fine player, but as you guys have talked about already, we know the limitations there. But it's going to be tough. But I did want to ask Matt about, as we talk about the Denver Nuggets, also the Michael Porter Jr. part of it, because look, as talented as he is, the injuries always crop up when we talk about, of course, Joel Embiid and speaking about his injury history there. And I know it's more a longer history of it, but a lot is on that team with his scoring ability at that starting position on the wing to be that guy. And how does it look so far? And how much do they really lean on him with both he and Murray coming back with the injuries?
What's funny about MPJ is everyone else outside of Denver immediately brings up the injuries, and everyone that covers the Nuggets goes, does he know the plays? Like, that's like the number one question is like, there were sequences in their first preseason game where he literally got lost 3 times on a possession, caught the ball, and then drained a contested jumper over 2 guys. He's a 6'10", 50, 40, 90 shooter when he's healthy. He's unreal. Like, he's just unreal. There are very few players I've watched in 15 years covering the league that have his ability to convert low percentage shots at a high rate. The injury stuff, no one really knows. Yeah, he was supposed to be fine last year. He tweaked it in preseason versus Golden State. 9 games in the regular season, he's done for the year. There's always going to be that concern with him. It's unlikely he's going to have the same kind of long career that some players have. It's just unlikely. However, the odds of him getting through a season for the Nuggets to make a run, pretty good. They're not high, I would say, relative to your standard NBA player, but they're pretty good to where you would feel comfortable with it. He looks great. He's in shape. Again, phenomenal scorer. If he can start to put together the mental parts of the game in terms of understanding where to be and how to operate in the system, then again, I just think the Nuggets are going to be one of the best offensive teams that we've seen.
All these teams have cases to make playoff runs. They have great players. They're on revenge tours, and they all have a Locked On podcast covering their team 5 days a week. You can get them on the YouTube channel as well as on the podcast. So, guys, thanks so much for hanging out with us on the Locked On Maverick or Locked On NBA Roundtable. Coming up next, it's nothing but Bet, our betting segment to get you ready to rake in some cash this NBA season. Your boy Q of the Locked On Bets podcast will join us to break it all down. Continuing now on the Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview 2022 presented by Audacy and the Locked On Podcast Network. Locked On Bets is your daily one-stop shop for all of your sports wagering needs, hosted by your boy Q and Lee Sterling every Monday through Friday on the podcast. Your boy Q joins us right now on our segment Nothing But Bet to talk about the revenge tour teams, the bunch of teams we just put together because they all are coming for revenge. The Phoenix Suns have a season that they need to revenge for because they went out in the second round last year against the Dallas Mavericks in just almost like just embarrassing fashion. They have the Robert Sarver, investigation that was ongoing all last year and then came to a point during the offseason. He's now going to sell the team. DeAndre Ayton had his contract situation where he was wanting a max deal. They didn't want to give him a max deal. He went out and had to go get an offer sheet from another team. Like, that can be a level of disrespect. Jay Crowder, one of their starters from last year, all through the playoffs and everything, doesn't want to play for them anymore. He's sitting out. Meanwhile, the Phoenix Suns still have the highest odds of this group to win the title next year, plus 1,200. Are you buying the Suns?
I'm not buying the Suns. I fell for the banana in the tailpipe last season, 64-18, the number one seed. I thought that they were going to be in the finals, no doubt. But as you mentioned, dipped out to the Dallas Mavericks. I didn't see that one coming, but it did. And there's just so much weird going on around the Suns. I thought that they were a great landing spot for KD, and then my conversation would be different, right? If they were able to go out and make that move with the Nets for KD, then, okay, we'd have a different conversation. I think that Devin Booker is fantastic. DeAndre Ayton still hasn't talked to coach, right? He said the other day he hadn't talked to Monty Williams about being benched in the playoffs. So, that's a conversation that needs to be had. And it hasn't been had, even though Coach Williams is kind of like, oh, yeah, no big deal. I don't talk to a lot of guys. Yes, you do. Right. So I think that that's a situation. You mentioned the owner and all that. I think that that's good. That's something that was almost felt like a Donald Sterling type situation. I think that him selling the team is going to be good, even though he's going to get paid $1 bazillion and he'll be, caked up forever. But whatever. I mean, it's a whole nother scenario. I don't know if they could duplicate and replicate what they did a season ago and then some, right? Expand and continue to be better. I think that they take a slight step back. Chris Paul's not getting any younger. Every time I say that I'm expecting him to slow down a little bit, he keeps on trucking and keeps on rolling. But at some point, I think the decline is there. So I'm not buying the Suns like I bought the Suns a season ago.
Oh, I also didn't mention that they happened to lose to an NBL team in preseason, which has not happened since 2015. So I don't know about
man. They're in Vegas chilling.
I don't know about losing to an Australian league team that hasn't happened.
Oh, no.
The other thing about the Ayton situation, he could be traded during the year. Like that could happen. Right. Like, even though he signed this contract, there's a certain point in the year where he can agree to a trade, and so that could all change all of this.
Right.
The other point about the Ayton thing is that Monty Williams, I've met him, is like the most approachable person I've ever met in basketball. Like, just the nicest, down to earth guy. Will sit and talk to you. Will ask you questions. Like, I don't know if you haven't talked to Coach. I don't know. It might be on you because that guy he's up to talk to any. He's up to talk to me.
Well, you're a great guy, man. Why wouldn't he want to talk to you?
The next two teams in this group that have higher title odds are the Denver Nuggets and the Philadelphia 76ers, both plus 1,600. They got their star big men that were 1 and 2 in the MVP last year. Which of these teams are you buying more so, the Nuggets or the Sixers?
I'm going Nuggets all day. I won't even let you get the words out of your mouth, man. I'm going Nuggets all day, and it's more of a disrespect to James Harden and the 76ers than it is even the Nuggets. I don't buy anything that James Harden has to do with. I really don't. The only thing I buy is that he's going to get his money. He's going to go out there and put up a bunch of points that are going to be meaningless because when push comes to shove and they need him the most, he's going to disappear. He always does. He's done it for year on top of year on top of year. And then when he gets unhappy, he'll get fat and he'll bounce. And that's just, that's what it's the inevitable, or else he'll quit. But he'll show up at the club afterwards. You can lose in a game that matters the most, and he'll be a no-show, but he will show up to the party. Look, he'll show up to the club to the point where they all of a sudden will sound the alarm when James walks in. The alarm goes off. Ding, 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 ding. James is here. James is here. And all the ladies come running out because they know what time it is. It's time to make it rain. Just saying.
I have heard epic stories about not just James Harden at strip clubs. What he brings to different cities to go to strip clubs.
Exactly. That's why he has his own light. He has his own alarm when he gets there because it's a big day for them. And when I say them, I mean the ladies.
The Sixers have this. The Sixers have this. I love that. This is like a reason why for us to not pick the Sixers. The Sixers also have this trio in Joel Embiid, James Harden, you mentioned, and Doc Rivers that have all like blown huge games at a certain point in their career. So if they're able to exercise these demons and make it to the finals, just make it to the finals. Let's just stop there.
Right.
Like it would be like a huge feat for them. So plus 1,600. I wouldn't put money on it, but the Denver Nuggets, I am buying the Denver Nuggets because I think Jokic is that good and he's getting back Jamal Murray. Michael Porter Jr. is just a bonus for him, but if they get anything from him, he's a 50, 40, 90, 6'10" guy.
Right. No, I like getting Jamal back is huge, man. Getting him back is big time. And of course, you know, they have the players to get it done. Let's put it like that. Denver's one of those teams. It's almost like a sleeping giant, right? They're there. You know that they have the ability to just blow up. You're just waiting for them to make it happen. I think getting Jamal back, I hated when he got injured. And that was such a huge blow to Denver. And so I think with him back is big. And Michael Porter, man, if that guy could ever stay healthy, I mean, you want to talk about injuries. That guy was injured all the way back in college, right? If he could ever just stay healthy, the kind of player he could end up being. But at this point, like you said, he's really just a bonus.
And they've added some depth too, right? They made the trade for KCP, so they've now added Kentavious Caldwell-Pope as like a defender on the perimeter. They added Bruce Brown from the Nets, which I thought was a pretty good pickup. They've just added people here and there, and so I think that's a really interesting team. Although they did add DeAndre Jordan, which is not an addition.
No, that's definitely that. He does nothing for me at all. Nothing. They have a couple rebounds, but that's about it.
A team that's doing nothing for people in the NBA, at least in the circles that I've talked to, is the Miami Heat. They're plus 1,800. They were just in the Eastern Conference Finals last year. Why are the Heat being kind of slept on as going back to the finals?
Because everyone saw what they had a season ago, right? Everyone saw what they had a season ago and said, what? They need one more scorer. They need one more big-time player. And guess what? That player was out there and available. His name was Kevin freaking Durant, and they didn't go and pull the trigger. And I know that they had to jump through a lot of hoops, but look, they got a guy with slick back hair that's chilling outside of a beach somewhere in Miami named Pat Riley that makes things happen, right? And I don't understand why that was my odds-on favorite where Kevin Durant was going to land. He's going to end up in Miami. Him and Jimmy Buckets are going to wreck shop. I thought that would have been a great location for him. I think that Kevin Durant, his personality would have fit in very well there, and they would have been able to just run the East. But it didn't happen, right? And so now KD's still in Brooklyn, and I think Miami missed a huge opportunity because they need that guy. They need a guy who's going to stop them from going on a 5, 6, 7, 8-minute drought with scoring, similar to Boston. That's what they do too. They go on that long drought, man, and you can't do that because a team like, I mean, even if the Warriors, if they're to square up like in the finals, the Warriors, even if they go on a 5 or 6 minute drought, they'll hit 4 threes in a row, and all of a sudden, boom, there you go, they're leading, right? I mean, you can't go on droughts like that in the NBA, and that's the problem with Miami.
The Heat are like this weird fool's gold where they talk about the Heat culture and, we can find these guys like Max Strus and Gabe Vincent and Omer Yurtseven. And like, we can find these guys and even Duncan Robinson a couple years ago and bring them up. And then in the regular season, when some of our stars or better players are out, they can cover for them. That doesn't work in the playoffs often. Like those guys don't just come up and like win you playoff games. You have to come with the guys that you have. And Kyle Lowry not being good enough last year really, really hurt them. He should have been that guy that you mentioned that stops them from going on these droughts. And he wasn't good enough. Now, hopefully he comes back this year, is healthier and all that, but he's still getting older. He's in year, this is year 17 for him?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, he's in my opinion, he's old Lowry now, right? He's not Kyle Lowry, he's old Lowry. And so I just think you know what you're going to get from him, and it's not a whole lot. So that's why they needed a guy like a Kevin Durant. They need someone who could be a sniper and just all of a sudden take over a game. Jimmy Buckets is awesome. I love what he brings to the table offensively and defensively, right? He plays both sides of the court, but man, they just need someone that's a sniper. They needed a KD. I really thought that was going to be the landing spot. And I was telling everyone, like, watch out. They are going to be nasty. Well,
I just didn't think they had enough stuff to get him.
No, obviously they didn't, or they would have, right? I mean, it's not like I'm sharing a secret that they didn't know. Oh, Kevin Durant was available. I mean, they knew he was available. So obviously it just wasn't going to work out for them.
The last team on this list, the Dallas Mavericks, my Dallas Mavericks.
Boom.
Plus 2,500 to win the title. They were in the Western Conference Finals last year. They have Luka Doncic, who is arguably the best player in this group, arguably the best player in the NBA. He can like bring teams along with him, no matter who is behind him, who's on the floor with him. Why are the Dallas Mavericks so far down this list as far as title odds? I mean, we've mentioned 10 teams, I think, now.
Right. I just think that, I mean, you have Luka, Brunson's gone, right? I mean, you have Luka, and he's fantastic. And it took me, I'll be the first to admit, I was a little slow to the party. I thought when the Mavs made the draft day move and got Luka, everyone was singing their praises. I was in Central Texas at the time, so everyone is locked in on the Mavs, right? And they're like, oh my God, look out. This is the next Jason Kidd. And I was like, whoa, slow your roll there, man. Jason Kidd is an HOFer, man. And I'm a Bay Area guy, so I've been watching Jason Kidd since high school. So I'm like, hey, slow your roll. Well, fast forward to now, and Luka is fantastic, right? And I don't mind being the guy to say I was wrong. Luka is great. The problem I have with Luka, and you would know better, you host the Locked On Mavericks show, Luka goes at his own rate. Luka, I feel like when he's in the game, he's kind of goes at his own pace, and sometimes the rest of the guys, it's hard for them to even stay engaged. I thought Brunson sometimes struggled to play with Luka at times last season just because they went at different paces. And so I think if you can get someone to complement Luka and he maybe speeds up the pace a little bit, because what he does is so effortless, man. He really does. And I know Jason Kidd challenged them and said, you got to be strong defensively. I'm rooting for them. I'll be the first to tell you I'm rooting for the Mavs because I'm a Jason Kidd guy. And I want Jason Kidd to succeed, and I think he has the weapons there in Dallas to succeed, starting with Luka. He's just got to have a little bit more around him. That's the biggest thing. But free agents don't always often go to Dallas, as we all know. It doesn't happen too much, and so that's always going to be a mystery to me as well. I thought Mark Cuban's a guy that most players would like to play for. I mean, Mark Cuban is a player's kind of a guy, right? So it always like the big $1 million mystery. Why don't guys want to go to Dallas? And maybe with Luka there, somebody will finally step up and go.
That sounds like every fourth show on Locked On Mavs during the offseason. Yeah, so Luka goes at his own pace. The Mavericks were 30th in the NBA in pace last year, dead last, the slowest team. But it works for them because they play Luka's gonna. It works for them. They had a really good team last year. Made it to the Western Conference Finals. Beat the Suns with that pace, and they found out a recipe and an identity that makes them work. It's the defensive end, and then it's the all right. Just everybody clear out, F off, and Luka's gonna get you the ball at a certain point.
Right.
And they lose Brunson in that, but they add Christian Wood, who's one of the best talents they've had on the team in a little while. His fit is going to be interesting. They're starting him off the bench to start the season. They bring in JaVale McGee to bolster that front court where they were starting Dwight Powell for 5 minutes, and then that was it in the playoffs.
Man, he'll give you everything he's got. That's what I do know. JaVale will give you everything he's got. I'm not a big fan of him. I used to not like him when he was in Golden State because of his rat tail. I know that I shouldn't judge a person by that, but I'm being honest with you because we're honest people around here. But he'll give you everything he's got, and I can respect that.
More thoughts about people's rat tail and hair situation and how it connects to betting angles can be found on the Locked On Bets podcast Monday through Friday with your boy Q and Lee Sterling. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview 2022 presented by Audacy and the Locked On Podcast Network. Don't forget, this is a 6-episode series where we will continue through October 17th discussing every NBA team with the experts that know them best. If you missed our contenders group, make sure to go back and hear more about the NBA Finals favorites going into the 2022 season. Tomorrow, we'll visit with the teams that are on the rise, the Cleveland Cavaliers adding Donovan Mitchell, Memphis Grizzlies making their revenge, Minnesota Timberwolves adding Rudy Gobert, the New Orleans Pelicans with Zion returning, and the Toronto Raptors that kicked the tires around Kevin Durant. Are they going to regret not making that move? Once again, I'm Nick Engstead, and until next time, thank you to our friends at Audacy and you for listening or watching. Find the Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview 2022 on Audacy or your favorite podcast provider to make sure you don't miss an episode.